My name is Chayse Whitmore and I am sitting here with Leon Wratt. Leon Wratt was the content director for The Edge from 1994 to 2014 and was instrumental in the station's success and where it is today. For over a decade, and to this day, he has been the director of content for all of MediaWorks. I'm honoured to sit with someone who I consider a pioneer of New Zealand radio, and after my studies, hopefully my future boss. Welcome, Leon Wratt.
Great, welcome. No, what an intro. I've never had such an amazing intro in all my years in radio. So
thank you.
Thank you, Jace. Yeah.
Tell me about your radio philosophy, how you applied that to The Edge in the early days, and how it has changed over time.
Yeah, I mean, when I went to The Edge, the radio landscape was very different.
Mm.
Pretty much there were no network radio stations. They were all local radio stations.
Mm.
So mostly everything we were doing. So for example, when I went to The Edge in Hamilton, it was only on 97.8 FM in Hamilton. It was just a regional Hamilton station.
Buzzard, right?
Yeah, well, originally it was Buzzard. By the
Right.
time I got there, it was The Edge. So I was actually
Okay.
the second content director. Janie Ranguni was the first one. She was only there for about 9 months and then she left. I was working for the same company in New Plymouth, actually, at Energy FM.
That's where I'm from.
And yeah, oh really, New Plymouth?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And then I came up to, moved up to Hamilton to work with Jay-Jay, who I'd worked with at Energy, to run The Edge, and that was my first content director role. So in that you're responsible for how the radio station operates.
Wow.
So initially we were just a local station. We did incredibly well. We took the station from pretty much last in market to first in market in the space of about 18 months. And that was a lot of personalities came in. We had a guy called Bob Reed, or Butt Ugly Bob was his nickname. So Bob came in and started doing breakfast. We moved Jay-Jay, who was doing drive. She moved into breakfast. So it was Bob and Jay-Jay, which was really the first of our breakfast shows, I suppose, under me in many ways, as content director, and they stayed together for a long period of time, and then we went through the various things. My philosophy around that was really, I believe, radio is such a great medium, and I think it's you get a chance to gain an audience every day. You
Yes.
also get a chance to lose an audience every day. So every day it's like you're on stage. So you've got to put your best foot forward, you've got to play the best music, and you've obviously got to be entertaining or give people enough reasons to keep coming back to you. And so that was really the philosophy, which was to be as fun and exciting and interesting as we possibly can, play great music, and hopefully people will choose us to listen to. Yeah, and do some pretty crazy stuff.
Wow.
Yeah, which was really to get the attention.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, the reason why Bob Reed, he actually named himself Butt Ugly Bob, it was really to stand out.
Yes.
How do you stand out? If you just Bob Reed, it's just a pretty basic name. But Ugly, everybody remembers it, so
Yeah.
it was about how to stand out. And obviously people like Jay-Jay, exactly the same thing. She did a lot of things to really try and make herself stand out in that space and get people to notice you first and foremost, because that's the most important thing to begin with.
Wow.
Yeah, if people don't know who you are, if they don't know about your radio station, they're not going to listen to you. So that was sort of the philosophy, really, and then from there we grew into a network, we went first into, I think, Aotearoa was our first network market, and then we went into Tauranga and into other markets throughout the country for the next sort of 5 years or so.
Wow.
And that was together with the Rock, because the Rock was also in the same building with us.
Yes.
Yeah, so Edge and Rock really grew at the same time together.
What were some revolutionary ideas you tried to implement back in the day that are now commonplace?
Entertaining drive shows. So previously, really it was a lot of more music, less talk. So people would have a breakfast show, but they didn't really have an entertaining drive show.
Right.
Pretty much it was solo. If you look around at the time or look back, it was pretty much from 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. For the rest of the day, it was just solo shows. And I really went overboard on the personality side of it. So we brought in dual personality drive shows. We brought in dual personality night shows. Really tried to up the level of entertainment. So basically, there was always something happening on The Edge. It was the most exciting thing going on, and we would try and win that. It wasn't just about the music, it was also about the other reasons why people would tune in, like have a laugh, or to be outraged, or to cry, whatever it is, whatever emotion.
Right.
We're just trying to trigger emotion. So that was really the philosophy. Yeah, because it's very hard for people they can talk about a radio station which plays good music, but that only gets you so far. Right. So, and the difference between a radio station and a Spotify playlist. A Spotify playlist has lots of good factors, but it's just a Spotify playlist of music.
Right.
And it doesn't have any of the other things that radio brings. And when you're in a radio sense, you've got to be more than just that. And even a station like Channel X, which I don't know if you've had to listen to, but Channel X is a station that basically I put together a music playlist on Spotify over an Easter weekend, and we had sort of 3 or 4 weeks to get a new station on air, and even with Channel X, which is just a playlist, but we made it stand out because we were anti-radio announcers, anti-news, anti-traffic, anti-weather, anti-everything else. And in that, we created a brand that stood for something.
Yes.
And so that brand was, we're just going to do great radio with heaps of music and obviously some sort of those funny liners that we used to have on Edge, or would have on Edge, to try and bring some entertainment to it all. So not only do people think, oh, I love Channel X because it plays good music, or I love the Edge because it plays good music, but I love the Edge, or I love Channel X, or I love the Rock because they make my day better. They it's like a great TV show. They elevate my enjoyment of life, and so that's what you're trying to achieve, which might sound a bit sort of highbrow to a certain extent, or you're trying to achieve something, but you've got to try and do that.
Well, and it's the consistency, where people are returning to something that they know, the same group of friends, and following their growth over sometimes.
And that is a key to success, which I think most people don't understand. I mean, the consistency of brand is something which is so important, and I'll give you the most basic one that I've always used, which is if you go to the dairy and you buy milk, and then you get home and you open it up and it's orange juice, that's not what you bought. So every time you come to the Edge, or every time you go to the Rock or Channel X or whatever, it has to be the same brand. It has to fulfill what that brand promise is, which for milk is that it's white, it comes from a cow, and it tastes like milk, right? That's what you expect. Not that it's orange and it tastes like orange juice. Those two things. So that's why the brand consistency is so important, and that's a really important part of setting in the listener's mind or the consumer's mind. This is what this brand is about, and then fulfilling that promise.
Wow.
So that's really important. Which also means the same for and then you go down through the breakfast show has to do the same thing. So if the breakfast show stands to be funny, outrageous, real, honest radio, and then they do shows that don't meet those, then people go, oh, that's not the show. I don't know what that show is about. Right. It becomes confusing to people, and then you tend to lose engagement with the audience because of it. So, setting that level of expectation and then achieving that consistency is extremely important. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What was the thought behind creating a radio station like The Edge, and how did it stand out? Did competitor stations adapt?
Yeah, they did. Yep. Other people copied. But what they can't copy is they can't copy Jay-Jay. They can't copy Butt Ugly Bob. They can try and emulate some of the competitions or some of the stupid promos that we came up with, or fun promos we came up with. Yeah. But they could never quite get there. So, we did some pretty crazy stuff back in the day. Two strangers in a wedding where Zane and Paula got married. We were the first, certainly the first, any first radio station or television, to marry strangers, right? And at the time, it was outrageous. Yes. Yeah. We were on, Paul Holmes had us on TV 3 nights in a row. It was that outrageous. Yeah. We had, ministers from churches that were absolutely outraged, and going on Paul Holmes. The irony is that later on they were actually put in jail for fiddling with kids. So that was a very bad scenario for that particular minister. Wow. But it's hypocritical. But we created that, and now yet Marrying a Stranger, funnily enough, is one of the most popular TV shows. Yes. Like 25.
Married at First Sight.
Yeah, Married at First Sight. And now if we did it again on radio, we did it 4 times. The incredible thing with The Edge, and this is a big philosophy that I always had, which was, if we're going to do something, we do it to achieve an outcome. So it's not just about the entertainment side. So, for example, with Zane and with Paula and Zane, while we thought that it was an amazing idea and it would get us a lot of attention, and it did. We had massive ratings off the back of it. We got massive publicity off the back of it. But while those were all byproducts of doing something incredibly well with the right belief and the right heart to begin with. So an example of that is, you can decide to do something. So we could have married two strangers, not really cared about whether they were together or not, because we just wanted the greatest outcome from a competition perspective. But we didn't. The way that Jay-Jay and another guy, Daryl, and myself, and I think it was Jason on here at the time, we talked about the fact that, we were going to do it, but we were going to do it and we were going to be successful. We were going to find a guy who wanted to get married, who was absolutely willing to make that, to believe in us and believe in himself, because he did get a chance to choose basically who he was going to marry. They just never met.
That's
they
good.
Talked. Yeah, they talked. Yeah. Better than Married at First Sight.
Yes. Yeah.
Married at First Sight, they never get to choose them. In this in the way that we set it up, they never met, but they had spoken, and they basically had an on-air date, you could say.
Yeah.
So they'd sort of already done it.
And the difference being that Married at First Sight, they probably wouldn't care if they actually wanted to get married or if there was a future in the relationship.
Well, I don't think the producers do.
No.
The producers are there to create television, and therefore I'm sure they absolutely love the idea of people still being together. But nothing is like it is with what we've got with Paula and Zane, who have just celebrated their 25th anniversary together.
Wow, I was just about to ask if they're still
and they've got 3 kids. Every single
my
person that we've married on Edge, and it's 4 now. There are 4 couples. I think last count there are 11 children. And they are all still together, which is phenomenal. Just in it, just in
Side
itself.
Business
Just in itself. I said to JJ, you should be a marriage, person that arranges marriages. But she was incredible through that process. We did all sorts of different little twists on things where we basically had 2 grooms and the bride had to choose which one she was going to marry on the day.
God.
We did lots of twists and various things. But they're all still together to the day, so
which is
really phenomenal.
I had no idea.
So really, I suppose the philosophy was, let's do something amazing that people are going to remember and always remember about the Edge, and we would elevate the days, but we could also create some really amazing moments for the people that were entering the competitions or the people that were listening, and that there was something there that was above and beyond the normal. And again, I was very lucky because I had fantastic people that were working with us, working with me, that also shared the same philosophy, or bought into the philosophy maybe, but were actually able to do it.
Right. And
one of the real, one of the real things about wanting to, when you want to do something as a person, and general in a war, or a manager in a business, coach of a rugby team or a hockey team, you've also got to then sort of parry that to, do I have the people able to actually do it?
Yes.
So do I have the players able? So if you're Razor Robinson, so he's the All Blacks coach, he knows that he has to have the best players in the world playing the best rugby to win the Rugby World Cup. And if he doesn't have that, he's not going to win. And for me, I had to have some fantastic radio announcers that 100% believed in what we were doing to also achieve the same thing. Because if they didn't, they were the ones that were actually on air that you were listening to that was doing it. If they don't do what I need them to do or weren't capable of doing it, then we would never have achieved that. And like I said, I give JJ great raps. Really, she was the person that made sure that Paula and Zane were going to work, because she put so much time and effort into making sure that was going to happen.
Wow.
So I think that's a really key factor to being successful in that field.
What did you find most challenging in your role at the Edge?
Just the day-to-day management of people and the expectations of listeners, really. The hardest managing people is always hard. I mean, that's every probably manager will say that everyone goes through. We went through some really great times and some really hard times. We had some tragedy at Edge and we had some ecstatic moments at Edge. So there's a lot of highs and lows. Jay-Jay and Dom really struggled to have a child. That was really difficult for them.
Yeah.
So you're managing through that sort of scenario. So those things were difficult. And the other one was just probably the day-to-day, when you set a bar so high and when you want to make every day really pay off for a listener, or to win those listeners, it's draining on you personally and the team. So so those are probably some of the really tough moments. And that just requires that dedication and energy to achieve what you need to do to do it. But I suppose that's one of the challenges that most of the team find difficult, is just every day they've got to turn up and they've got to go on stage for 3 or 4 hours if they're on air.
Yeah.
And they've got to create a show that people want to, or something entertaining for people to connect with. And these days it's even harder because you've also got the social media side of things.
Yes.
So then there's the visual expectations, which is the big change that we have now. Yeah. So those things are challenging.
It's interesting you touched on that, because my next question is, where do you see radio in the next 10 years? Because there's already been such a massive change just in the last 5-10 years with
there has. Space. We definitely see radio as becoming more visual, and already has. In all of our studios, video is a massive part of that. So the video output is massive. And I suppose the on-demand content side of things is really growing as well. So that ability to be able to, to if you missed a show, being able to listen on a podcast, catch up, or being able to, even get into the scenario we'll want to do, which is where you can just basically rewind and start at the beginning of a show. It's really radio probably becoming more on demand.
Yes.
In the way that is, and the technology is really important, which is why we're investing so much into growing our ROVA brand, and what we need to do there. We've just launched a new version of that app this week.
Yes.
Still getting through the bugs, but we will sort that out. But we see that as being a really incredibly important scenario to really grow a platform that the consumers and listeners and the brands and for other content, that it's going to be a great place to consume. Especially New Zealand content. That's especially what I want to make sure that they can find, because I think that the overseas platforms are generally bad for local content providers. There's a lot of people growing up these days who probably don't associate with a lot of New Zealand creators. They only associate with international. I know my own son, doesn't really follow anyone from a New Zealand perspective, but he's following a lot of international stuff. You do wonder what that means for New Zealand content creators, and also for New Zealand as a whole.
Yes.
What is that doing to New Zealand culture? And especially I think it's really tough for the musicians out there as well. That's really, really tough, because we expose radios, funnily enough, now the hero of local music. We used to be chided for not playing enough New Zealand content, but New Zealand radio plays twice to 3 to 4 times as much content as what the music platforms do.
Wow.
So I think that's important, because that's still a place for the new artists to get exposed, or even the ones that are current around, to get exposed and to get in front of people is really important. And I've really enjoyed working with those artists, New Zealand artists, over the years, because they can interact with the brands and be part of the show. And I just saw Mitch James was on air this morning with the Edge guys.
Wow.
And it bothers me if radio became weaker. If we don't grow a local platform for music, we're not going to have. Where's the next Mitch James going to get found? Because the algorithms on these other platforms, whether it be Spotify, YouTube, they're not playing. They don't care whether it's a local artist playing or not. So that's something that's really important, I think. So yeah. But the future of radio, I still think, is really good. We need to keep finding good new talent coming through. I think that's really important. It's been great this year that we've introduced Harrison.
Yeah.
Last year, we had really Cal and Yaz step up at Edge.
Yeah.
So there's some exciting new personalities coming through that have got a heap of talent. So that's a really exciting sort of moment.
Yeah.
A station like the Edge is always changing because people like Sharon decide to take a year or two off or do something else, or Jay-Jay moves on to more FM or whatever it happens to be. So that brand is forever going to probably have that period of changing personalities.
Yes.
But that's also a fantastic opportunity because new people like yourself, for example, can actually come through and have an opportunity to show your talent, which is really important. And again, I think that's what radio can offer both local creators, but also can offer the listeners as a chance to hear themselves.
Yeah, definitely. After my studies, I'll be knocking on your door.
Great. So where are you studying at the moment?
So at Te Whare Wānanga o Aotearoa. So it's you're aware of it? Yes. So it's a 1-year diploma.
Yeah.
And I'm all about it because there's never been, at least working for, mate, you know this definitely more than me. There's never been a fully blind announcer on working for NZME or MediaWorks in terms of a commercial.
No, I can't even think of a partially blind one, to be honest. Yep.
So hopefully I'll kick that barrier down.
Yeah, I think
at some point.
Yeah, I mean the greatest thing about radio is it's your voice. It's what you say. That's what matters. It's not necessarily how you look. It's whether or not you can convey an emotion and an understanding to someone or entertain someone. So you've got as good a chance as anyone of being able to do that.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that.
just listen to some great broadcasters like Simon Barnett and so forth if you want to learn how to do it really well.
So the purpose of this interview was to fill knowledge gaps in my assignment on the Edge on its political, social, cultural effects and its history, obviously. So these following questions are more related to you and your individual journey with radio. Sure. So what do you think people care more about when choosing a station? The hosts, the music, or something else?
Generally, from a music station perspective, first and foremost, the music has to be number one.
Right.
So you've got to get a format which at least they like, because it's pretty hard if you're having to listen to a station that plays a bunch of music you really hate, even if you really love the announcers. I think you're just going to listen to the podcast.
Yeah. That's true.
Yeah, so I think probably the music needs to at least be palatable, shall we say?
Yes.
And then the announcers would come after that. But a big part of that also is the overall brand of the station, and I think that is, we often get into a conversation about who's bigger, the announcers or the station. The announcers or the brand. Which one is bigger, and I always feel a station which has great brand equity. So stations like Edge, like Rock, George, hopefully all of our brands have got really strong brand equity. Therefore, a personality that can come in and a personality can go out, but the overall appeal is still there within the brand, because obviously, again, new people can come in. So Sharon can leave, Harrison can come in. Okay, it's different, but essentially it's the same, if you know what I mean. And overall, the brand remains the same. So I think So I think the brand is a really important thing and often is missed, which almost sits at the very top, because that really sets everything. When you say that I want to create a station like the Edge, you go, okay, these are the things that I want the station, or we think the station should be, and then from that drops the music, from that drops the personalities, from that drops the types of promos and the way that you position it. So it almost starts brand first.
And just a follow-on question from that, would you say that people are more loyal to the announcer or the station?
Well, that can change. I think again, that probably comes back to what I was talking about. Ideally, more people are loyal to the brand, but then there are still personalities where they can draw an audience to a brand. So for example, with Simon coming back to More FM, that is absolutely drawing an audience into More FM that we didn't have there previously. So yes, a really great announcer, a good announcer, a really popular announcer can draw an audience to a brand. And conversely, of course, if that person leaves and they're replaced with someone that doesn't have that same appeal, then you can lose some listeners.
Yes, yeah.
But how much that is depends on how amazing the person actually is, or how weak the brand is.
Right.
Conversely, so a really strong brand can let's say suffer through losing a leading personality better than a weak brand. A weak brand would be destroyed.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So a good example of that is probably I'll talk about our opposition is probably Mike Hosking, for example.
Yeah.
I think Mike Hosking is a very important part of ZB in the same way that Paul Holmes was a very important part of ZB. Now, ZB is still a very strong brand, has an extremely strong brand appeal and position in the market. It's been there for a long time. If Mike left and they replaced him with someone that was weak, then there is no doubt that they would lose a portion of audience.
Absolutely, yeah.
But how much that is depends on lots of things, the opposition, and all the other things. But I probably think they'd only lose 20%. That would be my guess at this point, because there is no major competitor to ZB. So it often can be other things that can come into effect. Whereas the music stations are extremely competitive.
Does that frustrate you that MediaWorks doesn't have a solid competitor to ZB?
It did, but it's so we sort of MediaWorks has had one of MediaWorks' anchor brands, I suppose, original brands was Radio Pacific, and Radio Pacific was a very old school, successful talk brand.
Yeah.
It then changed to Radio Live, which did okay, I would say, and then we had Magic Talk, which did okay, and then went to Today FM, which unfortunately didn't do okay, that did poorly. Yeah. And the economics of it at the same time with COVID and everything else meant that we just couldn't afford to participate in that particular market. So that's why we've exited the talk market, because at this stage we don't have the personality and we don't have the market can't support 3 talk stations if you count RNZ as a talk brand, which we do.
Right, yeah.
RNZ National, that is, yeah.
Yes. How did you get into the radio industry, and were you always interested in music and technology?
I think I was always very interested in music. I did perform as a child. My mother made me do various things as a child, singing and dancing and various other things, so it was a good following on from my sisters that were also doing it, and my brother that did things like shows and stuff. So you do you play Oliver or you play blah blah blah, and all these sorts of musicals. So that was part of my upbringing, which I think is what I love about radio, because I love the performance side, and I can really appreciate that performance side, even though I'm not on air. Right. Every so often I get dragged on air, but I'm not on air as such. But I understand that performance, all of the anxieties and all the other things that can come with that, and the physical and mental energy it takes to get up. But my into radio is quite interesting. Radio was always in my life because Mum always had the radio on at home. I grew up in Blenheim. Radio Marlborough was always on. I remember listening to songs, requesting songs, and various other things. I remember ringing Polly Gillespie when she was on nights on ZM out of Wellington, because we went and asked for a David Bowie song, and various other things. But early in my life, I actually had a guy called James Daniels. So where I lived in Blenheim, James Daniels lived next door to me. Now James obviously has just been on with Simon Barnett. So James and Simon were on the ZB show.
Sorry about that.
It's all right. So James was the local radio announcer on Radio Marlborough. So he did a show with another guy on Radio Marlborough, and Stacey Daniels, which you might know, Stacey, who was on Flavour and on Hits and various My FM. So Stacey and I were friends. So she was next door neighbour. We were similar ages, and we had other people also. And she had a sister and I had a brother, and anyway, so we'd hung out because it is what you do. Anyway, one day James pulled us into the local radio station to sing the Donny Dolphin song, which was he had a Donny Dolphin, which basically, for anyone that doesn't know the old radio trick, but the dolphin sound can easily be made with a cork, water, and a glass.
Really?
So you just rub it up and down. So you wet the cork, rub it up and down, and it sounds like put the microphone there, and it sounds like a dolphin. So every morning, Donnie Dolphin, who was supposedly in the pool, because next door to Radio Marlborough was a big pool, and supposedly he lived in this big pool. This was the story they made up. This is the theatre of the mind of radio, right?
Yeah.
That Donnie Dolphins, all the kids thought that Donnie Dolphin was somewhere out in the back of the pool in a special pool, and they wondered why we could never see him. But anyway, every morning he was on Radio Marlborough.
Wow.
With Donnie Dolphin. So everyone had Buzzer Bumble was in Wellington. There were all of these very characters. It was a thing at the time. Anyway, but that was my first time going into a radio station. And as we were singing the Donnie Dolphin song, and I remember it being very warm in the studio, one of the girls who was from actually fell on top of me and fainted, or I sort of called her, but she took me down at the same time. So I thought, well, if radio girls are going to fall on top of me, I'm quite into this as an idea. Then we're also very lucky that the local high school that I went to, so Marlborough Boys College, it had an FM license. And we had a local school radio station that was broadcast on FM, which was very, very rare, static FM. And so I did 6th and 7th form media studies, so I could be a DJ on ecstatic FM and do some stuff there.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was really into it. So I was very lucky. I had 2 years in high school, the 6th and 7th form, really doing bugger all other than playing sport and being at the radio station and chasing girls, and that was sort of, that was life as a 6th and 7th former.
Yeah.
And then I went overseas for a while and came back, applied for the ARA school in Christchurch, got into that. It was just Christchurch Polytech.
Yeah.
Did the broadcasting school and then went off to Nelson and from there went to Energy and then Edge and blah, 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 and here I am.
Wow. That's a great answer.
It was a long answer, I do apologise.
No, it's fine. It's like the whole backstory is fascinating. Even when you talk about it, I hear you light up quite a lot, and it's really cool to hear that it was kind of in every little part of your life. It's almost like there's no way you wouldn't have
No, I mean, music was always a part of my life, and performance was there, and then radio was there. And to me, what I loved about radio was that it's the performance and it's the business.
Yeah.
And it's the strategy and it's the marketing. Like it's such a beautiful 360 nature of a type of beast, and it's living. It's not, we never close. We're always open for business. Yeah. And it's just continuous. But that, I don't know, for some reason that was what I loved and what a lot of people doing radio love. Yeah.
So this ties back to a previous question I asked more about where you see radio in the next 10 years, but do you think the role that radio plays in our society today is more or less substantial than when you started?
I think it's less substantial because we had less media choice. Yes. So of course we were in some ways a more vital medium. If you wanted to hear the latest song, if you think about the 70s or 80s when I grew up, you had to go and buy it. You had to go down to the record store to buy it. The only other way, there was no computers, so the only way you were ever going to hear it was on the radio. And that's why people were doing requests and people were going da-da-da. And obviously the world's changed. Everyone's got on demand at their fingertips. They don't have to pay for anything pretty much. I mean, you can go onto YouTube and listen to any song you possibly want. No one ever has to pay money for music, really. Yeah. It's only if you want a service like Spotify that offers certain things, and in reality, we're probably paying too much for it. But so yes, it's different now. It's just now a part of a person's life in some ways, or not a part of a person's life. Yeah. I mean, it's just so the great thing about radio is it's free, it's portable, but there's a friendship and a relationship that can be formed, which is so strange. I mean, I suppose it's like social. Maybe social. Some people think that they look at content creators and they really appeal. They appeal to them and they really feel like they know them and all the rest of it. And that's what it's like for radio. I mean, when someone would meet Jay-Jay or they'd meet someone from the Edge, they honestly, it felt like they felt like they really knew that person. Yes. And so there's an emotional attachment there. And that's the part that really is important. I mean, so much about radio now, it always was, but I think it's especially now is informational, but it's also companionship.
Absolutely. Well, that's what was such a big draw for the Tom Cruise interview with Simon Barnett, right? Is that people really followed his journey and his all the way back to the prank.
All the way back to that.
And even that is still relevant, and it's still, people still remember that was a milestone in a sense.
That was a hard manage, I tell you that. That was hard to manage.
Yeah, they come under a bit of fire.
I was caught I was in the middle of that one.
Oh, no.
That's right.
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right with the social connection and literally following someone's journey and their knowing that person, feeling this connection, and I think Simon Barnett, as an example that you brought up, is definitely someone who shares so much of themselves that it's hard to not connect with them on a deeper level through the radio.
Yeah, and that vulnerability, which again I'm sure is something that you've learned at broadcasting school, possibly, but the vulnerability of the announcer, the presenter, or it is really key, just like in normal life.
Yes.
If you feel that you're having a conversation with someone and they're being vulnerable, then you're going to make a connection.
Yeah.
If they're not being vulnerable and they've got walls up, automatically you don't make a connection.
Absolutely.
Like it's as simple as that. And yourself being blind, you'll even read people's voices and sincerity. Yeah. A million times more. You've got other detectors other than the rest of us really rely on the visual cues, whereas you'll be relying on these audio cues, which makes you much more aware of that. Right. So I think that's really important. It's that ability to make a connection is the difference between a star and a non-star when it comes to a presenter or an announcer.
And a comet.
maybe that too.
And it's interesting that you touch on the emotions that tie into different announcers and the connection between the listener and the announcer, because AI is a huge thing now. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, up for debate. Sure. Do you think that the role of an announcer will ever be replaced by AI? And if so, how long do you think it will take?
I think some roles can be assisted with AI, I'd say, rather than replaced. So just as an example of that, I mean, we're getting into excellent mimicking of voices now.
Yeah, which is scary.
Which is scary, of course. The deep fakes, whether it be visual or audio now, are getting pretty good.
Yeah.
We do have a lot of repetitive tasks that announcers or people need to do, which, for example, an announcer, Simon, for example, has to record, I think it's 24 individual weather reports every morning, just as an example, which is just a 20-second, hey, here's your weather in Timaru today, here's your weather in Christchurch today, here's your weather in Auckland today, right? Which is very repetitive, and you think, well, Simon should not be thinking at 5 a.m. in the morning about 24 different weathers scenario. Right. So potentially, in the very not too distant future, Simon could still be doing that, but Simon doesn't have to do it.
Yes.
So it's a written thing where someone goes, yep, that's a forecast, that's a forecast, that's a forecast, and then Simon's voice is applied to that forecast. So from a listener's perspective, Simon's still reading you the weather, so that's that nice, but he hasn't physically had to do it, which gives him more time to prepare for the show. Or a little bit more of a sleeping possibly, if he can sleep. Yeah. So those sorts of things, so weather forecasts, traffic reports, potentially local news updates, all of that sort of thing. Absolutely see that as a real possibility. In terms of the AI DJs, they are a total fail at this point. We've had a look at them. Had to listen to some stuff. ARN in Australia.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's awful.
That was shocking.
It's shocking, and I don't even understand why they did it and why they continue to do it. It's so awful. We made a choice with obviously Channel X just to go. If it's no DJs, it's no DJs. We can create other ways of entertaining and making good things around the brand. You don't need this is all the time, which is really what those AI ones are doing. AI can't do comedy. That is well known. Yeah. It's the worst jokes of all time. You ever ask AI to do jokes? Yeah. And that's because there is it is not human yet. It is not able to distinctly find something. I mean, we will say things and do things completely unpredictable. Yes. Yeah. They do things with that the robots will do things that are completely predictable. Yes. Yeah. Now that is not comedy. The best of comedy is the absolute unpredictable. Yes. The best of entertainment is the absolute unpredictable in many ways. That's human nature. I mean, it's almost like I don't know, and watching sport. Sport is completely unpredictable.
Absolutely.
So therefore, if it was being run by algorithm, wouldn't it be almost known what it was that the outcome was going to be? Which means that we think it's fake in the same way that you would think it's fake. So I think that human connection, that whatever it is, nature of what we are, is very difficult to replace. This is, sure, it'll be able to do that if that's what you think is good. But like I said, to me at the moment it's probably more around the automation of some stuff and just some of those low-level repetitive tasks. I mean, really, most of what AI, when you have a look at it, it's generally doing automation processes. It's checking things, it's shortening down sentences, it's that's sort of where it's at. The pretty incredible stuff is obviously a lot of the visual. It's almost better at doing visual than it is doing audio. But in saying that, it can create some pretty cool tunes. Like we've had George FM have a feature where they say basically in this voice, sing me a song about this thing, and you get some pretty cool things come out of it. So there can be some entertainment there. But again, it takes for a human to present it, to create it, to think about it, to get it to create it. So it's a tool as opposed to an independent thought.
So I guess that makes a lot of sense to kind of do it hand in hand with the automated tasks and just have it, because again, that doesn't require emotion, right?
No.
You don't need emotion to read the news. In fact, would you say they actually don't? They actually ask for no emotion when you're reading sad news?
The best newsreader can, to a certain extent, read with emotion, but sometimes it's just informational. I mean, we're reading a lot of AI slop these days, which I'm sure is just absolutely fine,
right?
And can do some stuff. And again, we've been experimenting with a lot of different systems, and we find some systems are good and some systems are really terrible. But there is a lot of inconsistency in the outputs at times, and they are still making mistakes.
Well, because it can't create individual or on its own, right? Everything it does is kind of just a mutation of what it has learnt already.
Pretty much. So it's only information in, then it's 100%, and then it's just a mash of whatever that information is, and then whatever it dedupes. I mean, there's no doubt we've seen scenarios where I can't remember what the phrase that they call it is, but where it basically starts making stuff up, and that's a real problem. Like especially in a news situation or even a weather situation. You've got to be really careful that
tornado warning.
That's exactly that's exactly right. That it can absolutely do that. I mean, So there's some issues there around that. So you've still got to be checking off everything. I mean, there's a thing at the moment which is basically treated as your worst intern.
Well, because it's so hard to predict. No one can really predict what it's going to be even in 5 years. But so would you say there will ever be a point, in your personal opinion, that it will fully replace announcers? Do you think it will get so good that...
I think it can replace announcers. It's whether or not audiences accept that it's okay.
Would you go to an AI comedy show? Like that's almost on the same level, right?
I mean, at that point, you'd have to it would have to be at a level of consciousness that at the moment is not where it's at.
It's
not where it's at. I mean, you go back through all these old sci-fi movies, and often, they'll be talking to this voice up in the, hey, help me out with this, and they pretended that this thing had a form of consciousness. And I haven't seen anything that's got that yet.
And I'm hoping personally that it never does.
Just guessing. No, well, 100%. Otherwise, we're really in trouble.
Well, Leon Wratt, thank you very much for your time. It's been a
great
pleasure.
to meet you.
Yeah, likewise.